Hey everybody, welcome. This is Craig and I'm the founder and president of the University of Applied Research and Development, and I was so excited about our guest today that I had to cut off the countdown early. And so I want to welcome Marina Drazba. Great to have you with us.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, look, I'm excited because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and you and I have been gone through our PhD program at the University of Auckland. And is that a chicken we can hear or a rooster in the background?
Yeah, it's the Mother Clucker clan.
Awesome,
That's
awesome.
that's what I've called them.
So this is live. So if the rooster goes again, everybody, you know that this is a live
Yes.
interview with this incredible person who's making a difference in disaster reduction and also in climate change adaptation. So Marina, why don't you introduce what you're doing and how you came to be there? Give us a little snapshot of your history.
So I'm currently working as a climate change advisor and disaster risk management for FAO. And I've sort of come at this at a very roundabout way. I started as a geologist at College of Charleston in South Carolina. And my focus was always sort of landslides. So I've always had an interest in how landslides propagate, how they move. However, the technical aspect is very fascinating, but repetitive for me and boring. And so I always wanted to see how landslides and society, how they interact and how you can make it better. And so I got my master's at Portland State looking at how you can map landslides and predict them, which using remote sensing, which is really interesting as well, but repetitive. And then it's very hard to do. It's very hard to get that nuance right. But the more people you talk to, I mean, if you talk to the geologists about landslides, and if they're not specifically focused on it, they get really bored with the subject. You can see people's eyes glaze over. Even though I find it fascinating, everybody's like, no, thank you. But the same is true in society. Landslides are a problem that can do happen and occur because of human interaction. So how do you mitigate the human interaction aspect? Large landslides, obviously, there's very little you can do to mitigate. However, smaller landslides are something that you can and should look into. You know, just having a water spout or proper drainage in your property can help your neighbor and help yourself. Which led me to having a conversation with somebody at University of Auckland who was there to teach a disaster risk management course. And his name is Regan, Dr. Regan, at the University of Victoria at Wellington. And he went to the Rohingya camp because he works for an organization called Red R, or he's on the roster for Red R, which deploy engineers to areas that need them, such as like a refugee camp, to the Red Cross, to the UN, and we're sort of seconded in as like technical advisors. And so at the Rohingya refugee camp, he basically said, we need somebody like you, after sort of scoffing at me because he was like, landslides aren't really a DRM problem and nobody really thinks about them. That's fine, because they're a secondary issue. People look at flooding, they look at fires, they look at other things. But landslides are caused by flooding, they're caused by fires, they're caused by a lot of other causal effects. And then the refugee camp had a lot of landslide problems, which were directly linked to anthropogenic causes. And he brought me on, and that basically was the beginning of the end. And that's how I got here currently. And this is after 10 years of oil field work. So I worked on oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, in Africa, and then worked as a consultant, a technical consultant all over Latin America, Europe, and then I worked on boats in Indonesia. So this was like 10 years of field work, technical consultant work as a geologist, looking at risks and hazards in the oil field.
Wow. And so working in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, have you noticed, being an expert in this field, have you noticed that climate change is having an impact on fire-related disasters?
I think the cycle is at least in my personal framework, I think the cycle is that climate change is an overarching concept, and the DRM concept fits underneath it, because climate change is exacerbating issues where you would have low water. Now you have extreme low water, and where you have water, you might have extreme high water. So I think the climate change issue is a longer term problem to solve, which then sort of propagates DRM problems at other levels, where you might have drought, you have extreme drought. And I mean, last year, Death Valley hit 153 degrees Fahrenheit. Don't know what that is in C, divided by 3, multiplied by 2, or it's the opposite. So, I mean, if you think about it, they calculated when places would hit extreme heat where you cannot go outside and last for more than a few minutes. And they were thinking 2060, you would see 1 or 2 places, but in 2021, there was already 5 places in the world that had extreme heat where you as a human cannot survive. So that already is shortening the time frame that we thought we had. Earth is warming up and the waters are warming up, and actually our waters are sort of what cools us down. And if that's warming up, then we're not getting cooled down. So it's kind of I think there is a cause and effect, and there's a lot of linkages to be made. But I think one is overarching over the other, and it sort of forces the other one to act quicker. So disaster risk management, it makes us have to be more prepared all the time.
Right. And with the extreme heats, extreme water droughts, with those extremes, has there been a new taxonomy, a new language, a new way of describing this created?
I would say that there is yes and no. I think this is a problem with language. Unless language is universally accepted and everybody uses the terminology, it's confusing. If you don't, it's like going into a foreign country. If you don't speak the language, you know a couple key words, and you say those couple key words, that could be good. It could also be bad, because you're using those key words interchangeably with something that you don't understand. I think this is the problem, is that we at least this is the problem I'm facing. People will use keywords in a sentence, and so you think, okay, this dude knows, or this woman knows. Let's have this conversation, and that's the only thing they know. And then you have to go back and figure out where does their knowledge stop, and where do you have to then increase their capacity, and then where can you slot in to actually get something moving. And I think this is the difficult part, especially if you think about, okay, there's disaster risk management. I think it should belong in everything. I think you should, as a household, have an emergency plan for a fire. I think as a community, you should have a plan together. As a government, then you should incorporate the community plan. I think disaster risk management or risk reduction should be ubiquitous everywhere. And I think when you look at businesses with, I'll fall back to what I know. Oil field is really big on DRR, mostly because it's so dangerous. But I think that everybody should have DRR as part of their lexicon, and there should be a risk reduction person for absolutely every job, like you would have security. And I think that bringing that language to everybody so everybody can get on the same page, I think that's vital. So I almost wish that less taxonomy was being propagated forward and people would just get on the same page.
And agree on a set standard of words that means certain things, and people can use that, right?
Yes. Because it's really difficult to have these conversations with people. And I mean, I'm coming from academia now, back to private sector. Well, no, I'm working in the humanitarian sector. It's not private sector, but I'm working back into making it practical. And I think academia has some great brain trust to pull from. However, sometimes the brain trust moves too quickly for the practical application. So it doesn't, so your traction is actually making you go in circles as opposed to forward.
Tell us about FOA, and just for those of us who don't know, define it for us and let us know what you do.
Okay, so I currently work for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and it is sort of a sub company. Basically, their sole focus is food security and agriculture. And I currently was brought on to look at community-based disaster risk management and how to help civil protection and the Ministry of Agriculture to promote disaster risk management and climate change adaptation. First, climate change management is, I'm putting them kind of together, but they're kind of in sync, but longer time frames. So first, the community, we were trying to get them to actually do a sort of self-reflection of what their risk is. What is your risk present? What do you see? And then myself comes in and says, okay, this is what we see. And then together we build a community-based risk reduction plan. And so this was started prior to my arrival. And so I'm just helping them kind of come forward. And then this is funded by the Green Climate Fund. So there's a lot of other organizations that kind of feed into this as well. So we all take different areas and together we feed into the system. So other UN organizations kind of help out. And so it starts with something very small, like just putting drainage in a road or water. Actually, a lot of these villages don't have potable water, like being pumped into. So they have to go walk 5 miles to get water when it's dry. So bringing in a water tank or strong winds. If you're on a hilltop, what do you need to do? Can you build shelters for your animals, or keeping silos dry because they self-propagate seeds. So it's small things like that over the long term, where if they do have an event, let's say they do have a flooding event and they built a silo that's 1 story or 1 story off the ground, then they no longer have to worry about their food source becoming wet, or their seeds becoming wet or washing away. And so then that allows them to then implement better technologies for climate smart agriculture.
Right.
So
that's cool.
So you have to help them reduce their risk in one area so they can sort of capitalize on another area. If you're always worried about being hungry, you're not going to do something different.
Yeah. And that's what I really was looking forward to hearing you talk about today, was about the climate change and the impact on extremes, and really how communities, especially in developing nations, need to respond to reduce that risk, practical applications. Can you give us some more examples of things that your organization is doing?
They're doing quite a bit. I think one thing that the Sendai framework and UNISDR, they're trying to do is they're trying to increase capacity. They're trying to be able to mobilize nations to be able to respond, because as you said, it's a developing country. Other places have already done these things and have implemented X, Y, or whatever it is that they've done. But even developing countries are having a hard time putting all this into effect because it's piecemeal. You have to start small and then you have to build it up. But sometimes some of these projects take years, right? To increase the capacity for disaster risk management. The will is there. However, you have competing priorities. So if there is no budget, it is very difficult to implement. So let's say we bring in water tanks, and the water tanks, and actually people do this. I think IOM actually has brought in water tanks, and USAID and DFAT. They've all done really good work, and we're trying to do this as a coordinated body. And I think that's the most important part, is you have to do this as a coordinated body. You cannot do any of this work in isolation. And then Oxfam has done really great work during the Easter floods. They came in and they mobilized a lot of local actors, and I think that is key. As an international body, it's really important that we capacitate those in-house. And back to the language problem, I speak English. Tetum is what's predominantly spoken here. And I can't tell somebody what to do in English and have it reciprocated in Tetum. So either I get on board with Tetum, or you capacitate somebody here who's going to stay all the time. And since I'm here as an advisor, I'm going to leave. So that is actually what we're doing. It's our biggest projects here, capacitating the locals to be able to, one, understand the risk, because I think awareness is key. And two, to be able to respond to the risk. Now, the response usually takes funding or some sort of key insight. And I think this is the hardest thing to translate, because you can be aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it and mitigate that. But it back to being a household, a community, and then a government. If you all are not working in the same vein, then only one person, if only one household is doing it, then you're never really going to move forward. So it has to be en masse. And so that's the biggest work that we're doing here, is moving as a cohesive body together.
I was going to ask you about disaster mitigation and new methods and strategies, that your organisation is using and that you see being done in the industry. But that really answers that things are being put in place. So you're in Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Where else have you been?
Bangladesh. So I worked at the world's largest refugee camp in Cox's Bazar, and this is the basis of my thesis. I wrote a children's book on landslides, and it's basically started as a flip book, because it's really okay. So the Rohingya refugees, they got the short end of the stick, and we can speak a lot about who and what they are and where they came from. But one thing that they don't really have is a written language. It's an oral language. And so how do you explain physics and chemistry and landslide propagation to a population that doesn't have a written language? And so that was very difficult to bring awareness. How do you bring awareness to this population? Children had died of landslides because what they would do. Well, the geology in this area was quaternary sands and clays deposited from glaciers glacier deposits. They're not glacier deposits, but as the glacier eats away at the Himalayas, and the Himalayas actually get all these rain events, this is kind of the delta for the Himalayas. And so this land is not very, it's not rock, right? It's headed towards a rock, but it's not rock. So it's very sandy, very silty. And so as you excavate like a sand dune, it's more tied than a sand dune. But like when you play in a sand dune and you excavate the bottom of it, the top is going to slough down. And so as they're building their shelters and building and getting sand for sandbags to be able to create a steady foundation, they were creating these holes which would stay open, but then slight movement would cause them to collapse, and children were playing in them because they were cool compared to temperatures outside. And so unfortunately we had a couple lost their lives, and then we kept on having landslide issues. And so this was why I was brought in. And so how do you bring awareness to this population? How do you I mean, you can't just tell them don't do this. They're doing this for the survival, right?
Yeah.
And also they were prioritizing other aspects of their lives. This was like the most minor thing that just left a genocide event. And I'm going to tell you, I mean, people would stop you and they had no qualms about telling you what they left and how thankful that they were there and you were helping them, which puts it all into perspective. Because sometimes when we do these disaster risk management plans or risk reduction ideas, we really have to take into account who we're working with, and context, I think, if anything, is probably more important than your risk. Because if you don't address your context, your risk will never be addressed. So I spent about a month talking and working with the community, and UNHCR, the protection, the community-based protection, I will say second to none. Working with them was absolutely fantastic. And they provided me with translators, because we would have to translate from the Rohingya language to Bangla and then back to English. And so it was kind of, so that was added to the confusion. And so I thought pictures. How do you explain landslides? Pictures. And so I wrote this landslide book basically on the premise that if you took a flip book and you like moved it really quickly, you would see how a landslide would propagate. So tension cracks would show up. Oh, okay, what did you do here? And then it started raining, and the tension cracks started getting bigger and bigger. And then as you flipped it, then then I sort of anthropomorphize the mountain. So the mountain could walk. The tension cracks led to feet, and the feet actually caused the mountain to step away from its mother mountain and move away. And I put things that were occurring in the camp. We were making sandbags, so I made it sort of relevant. Because the Rohingya are Muslim, you can't really put people, like you can't make people into it. That's kind of idolatry. So I had to kind of play into those things. And because of it's not a written language, then I had to train storytellers about this. So then I trained them on landslides. So it became a big process because ultimately I was going to leave and I needed to leave this knowledge behind. So I trained like 350 people on how to read the story, and then propagated it through a population of 1 million people. And so then we reduced landslide risk.
Is that all?
Storytelling, And then I wrote books on flooding and, how a flood doesn't know its own strength. So it's an ox. And so like the strength of an ox. So make it relatable. So they know what an ox is, and they know an ox is strong, or water buffalo, which by the way are amazing. I'm obsessed with water buffaloes after that. So it's about things don't need to be complicated. Things can be as simple as a story. You just have to make it relevant.
So your PhD was around the outcomes of creating this flip book?
Yeah. It's about how measuring how awareness change can lead to an effective action. And in this case, because I was embedded into UNHCR and UNHCR was doing the camp management, we moved en masse. I was at the ground level with communities, and I was sitting, playing with children. And then to reinforce that, I also made a board game, and we made a play so it became knowledge and action. And then I was at decision-making level, making policy. Where can we build? Don't build here because it's flooding. And then using my remote sensing knowledge to actually start working with planners. And then it was both ways. The same information I was passing down, I was passing up, and together en masse we were working. So I measured their awareness prior. Now it sounds clinical, so bear with me. So I measured awareness prior, and I measured their awareness afterwards. Now, awareness is great. You know something is occurring, and you know something is there, present in your space. But now, do you understand your role and its role in that space? And so then I measured understanding. And then from understanding, once we hit sort of a critical understanding point, then we got action. And so the refugees got my WhatsApp number, and they started texting me pictures. And these pictures were of all these potentially risky, hazardous situations. And then I made them a how-to guide. Okay, you're seeing this. And then I would draw on them. And then I gave them a kind of a chart. So they started becoming the community practice. And they were the focal point experts in each camp. In 17 camps, I primarily worked in 9. And then it started growing and growing. And more camps were like, well, we want to do this as well. And more people in these camps. So then it sort of self-propagated. And so instead of me pushing, it was them pushing me for more information. And so I measured that. And then I measured how things changed and what was a change. And I think it wasn't until certain rain events, and they were new to this area. So none of them had really experienced this. And so to be able to state, they didn't believe landslides existed until the first rain event. And then they were seeing, oh, what is this? This is, we don't like this. This is we're losing things because of this. And so that you kind of need something to prod them a little bit, or prod a community a little bit. And once that prod came, then you need the community to always engage, or have somebody, it's like anything, your group of friends, there's always somebody who's more interested. You want that person. You want to take that person and then really indoctrinate them into DRR.
I think that's so brilliant. So brilliant. So awareness impacts action, and you use simple tools, because language, they didn't have a written language. So the flip book and the storybooks, and then a board game. And it went from training 350 people to impacting 1 million people. And then from one camp to 17. And they ended up with the user-generated content, sending you messages and then pushing you, and them owning it, driving it, responding. So the action came because of the awareness and implementing it. Wow. Really want to commend you for the impact that you've had. That's incredible.
I gotta say, it was tough. I mean, it was hard, and it was one of those things where it's hard to see the forest for the trees. You think you're doing something, but it isn't until they respond back that you're like, okay, I did something. That all the headaches and language barriers are no joke. They do impact your work, and it can be very, very frustrating. So it's super motivating for having the community want to have you. Like, they want you to sit down and be like, nope, we don't understand that, but let's find a different way together.
Wonderful. So Marina, just as we wrap up, and this has been really interesting, and I hope that our students were taking notes as you were talking, because I've got a page full right here of notes from you talking. For someone that wanted to get into really looking at climate change adaptation and reducing disaster risk, what's some of the things that people could put in place, or experiences they could have to help them pursue a career in that area?
I think both these topics are very broad. I think that, in my experience, people with a subject matter expertise in, let's say, in my case it's landslides, in somebody else's case it could be hurricanes or alert protocols or early warning system protocols. I think it's much better to have an expertise in one aspect of it, and then that feeds into the rest. Sometimes it's really difficult to get your point across when it's such a broad topic that if you want to do this work, I mean, you can take anything. I mean, you name a subject, you can become a DRR, and DRR and climate change will affect it. Take that anything and see how it does affect it, and then figure out how it can't, and go and work backwards. And then how it can't is huge, because there's the technical aspect. There's just the mechanics aspect. There's the community aspect. I do technical communication. I think that is a subject matter that we need to get behind so much more, because you can't have awareness until you can communicate it. And I think as scientists, we do such a poor job of speaking to communities. I mean, even as scientists, people don't want to hear about landslides because, it's not sexy, and they don't find it interesting because it's not their subject matter. So taking technical communication and making it relevant, I think for me, yes, technical science is very important, but there's a lot of people who do it. There are less people who do technical communication. And I would encourage a lot of people to look at how to make science relevant to DRR and climate change adaptation. I think it's absolutely key, and it's not even talked about. Like, I'm having a hard time being published because it's not relevant to most people. It's not science. It's not, science-y enough for journals, and it's too technical for communication people. So how do you communicate? And I think this is an open sore that needs to be bandaged and actually such a closed. Great opportunity for people to make a real difference. Yeah.
Marina, really want to thank you for sharing your experiences, sharing your PhD in the project, sharing your thinking on this, and thank you for getting up early with the rooster to share this with us from where you are. All the very, very best for the future, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me and reaching out. I really appreciate it. I mean, I always get a kick out of talking about what I do, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.